High in the Colorado Rockies, where eagles fear to nest and cell towers can reach, Jake Morrison hammered the last board over his cabin window. Cast out from the FBI after exposing corruption in his own unit, he'd chosen exile over compromise, trading his badge for an axe, his government salary for whatever the mountain would give him. The weathered cliff cabin had been abandoned for decades, its previous owner vanished without explanation. But when Jake's firewood splitting revealed a hidden trapdoor beneath the floorboards, everything changed. The narrow tunnel led to a sophisticated underground bunker, and inside that bunker sat duffel bags stuffed with more cash than most people see in 10 lifetimes. $250 million in untraceable bills, waiting in the dark like a sleeping dragon. Jake's trained eye immediately recognized cartel money, but whose cartel, and why was it buried here? As footsteps echoed on the trail below his cabin, Jake realized the most dangerous question wasn't where the money came from, but who else knew it was here. Could a man who'd lost everything risk it all again for a fortune that might cost him his life? The footsteps stopped. Jake pressed himself against the cabin wall, peering through a gap in the boarded window. 3 figures moved like shadows between the pine trees, their tactical gear a stark contrast to his worn flannel and jeans. Professional, military precision in their spacing, weapons held ready but not raised. They weren't hikers who'd stumbled onto his remote refuge. His heart hammered against his ribs as muscle memory kicked in. Count the threats, assess escape routes, calculate odds of survival. 6 months of chopping wood and hunting rabbits hadn't dulled his training, but it had softened his edge. These men looked like they ate broken glass for breakfast. The lead figure raised his hand, and the others froze. Jake caught a glimpse of the man's face, Latino, late 30s, with the kind of scar across his cheek that suggested he'd survived worse than mountain winters. The man's eyes swept the cabin's exterior with predatory focus. Jake's mind raced back to the bunker beneath his feet. The money wasn't randomly stashed. It was organized, vacuum-sealed, protected by military-grade equipment. Someone had spent serious time and resources creating that underground vault, the kind of someone who would eventually come looking for their investment. The scarred man whispered something into a radio, then gestured toward the cabin. Jake's blood turned to ice water. They weren't searching randomly. They knew exactly where they were going. He slipped away from the window and moved to his emergency pack, old habits from his federal days. Glock 19. 3 magazines, protein bars, water purification tablets, and a sat phone he'd sworn never to use. The phone could reach his former partner Sarah Chen in Denver, but calling her meant admitting he was in over his head. It also meant dragging her into whatever nightmare had followed that money to his doorstep. Through the floorboards, he could feel the weight of those duffel bags like an anchor, $250 million. Enough to disappear forever, start fresh somewhere with beaches instead of snowcaps. But money that size didn't just vanish. It belonged to someone with resources, connections, and zero tolerance for theft. The front door handle turned slowly. Jake's training took over. He dropped into a crouch behind his kitchen table, weapon drawn, safety off. The door creaked open, and cold mountain air swept through the cabin. The scarred man entered first, rifle sweeping left to right, professional clearing pattern. "Empty," the man called softly, his English accented with something that sounded Venezuelan. "But someone's been living here recently." Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. They were 10 feet away from the trapdoor, hidden beneath a throw rug he'd positioned carefully. If they found it, questions would become bullets real fast. The second man entered, younger but carrying himself with cocky confidence. Maybe they ran when they heard us coming. "No," Scarface replied, kneeling beside Jake's wood stove. "Still warm." He touched Jake's coffee mug on the counter. "Fresh. He's close." Jake calculated distances. 15 feet to the back window he'd left unboarded for emergencies. 20 feet to the front door. Both options required crossing their sight lines. The bunker entrance offered a third choice: drop through the trapdoor and navigate the tunnel system he'd only partially explored. But that meant abandoning the high ground and potentially trapping himself underground. The third man appeared in the doorway, and Jake's blood froze. Federal tactical gear, FBI windbreaker. His former life had found him. "Ramirez wants this wrapped up clean," the agent said, his voice carrying bureaucratic authority that made Jake's stomach clench. Agent Ramirez. Jake remembered him from the Denver field office. Ambitious, dirty, and dangerous. "Tell Ramirez the package is here," Scarface replied. "We just need to locate the current tenant." Jake's finger tightened on his trigger. 3 armed men between him and freedom. At least one federal agent working with cartel muscle, and 250 million reasons why none of them could afford to let him walk away. The mountain had offered him sanctuary, but sanctuary always came with a price. The weathered floorboards groaned under Marcus's weight as he descended into what appeared to be a storm cellar. His flashlight beam cut through the musty darkness, revealing stone walls that seemed older than the cabin above, much older. The narrow stairs ended at a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Marcus ran his fingers along the frame, feeling for any signs of recent disturbance. Dust coated everything, but the hinges had been oiled within the last few years. Someone had been maintaining this place. The door swung open with surprising ease, and Marcus stepped into a room that defied explanation. The space was larger than the cabin's entire footprint, carved directly into the mountain's bedrock. His flashlight revealed shelving units lining the walls, most empty except for a few scattered boxes and what looked like old radio equipment. But it was the far corner that made his breath catch. Stacks of military green cases sat arranged in neat rows, each one marked with faded Department of Defense stenciling. Marcus approached cautiously, his training screaming at him to be careful. In his experience, abandoned military hardware rarely stayed abandoned without good reason. He knelt beside the nearest case and worked the latches. Inside, nestled in foam padding, were bundles of cash. Not just any cash. Hundreds, 50s, 20s, all bearing serial numbers from different decades. The bills were pristine, wrapped in bank bands that had yellowed with age. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened a second case, then a third. Each contained the same thing, more money than he'd seen outside of federal evidence rooms. Rough calculation put each case at close to $200,000. There were at least 20 cases, $4 million, maybe more. He sat back on his heels, mind racing. This wasn't some survivalist's rainy day fund. The organization, the military cases, the hidden location, this had all the hallmarks of a professional operation. But whose, and why had it been abandoned? A sound from above made him freeze. Footsteps on the cabin's front porch. Marcus killed his flashlight and listened. Heavy boots, at least 2 sets, moving with purpose rather than stealth. The front door creaked open. He'd left it unlocked. Another rookie mistake that could cost him his life. Voices drifted down through the floorboards, speaking Spanish in low, urgent tones. Marcus caught fragments. Encontrar, dinero, matar, find, money, kill. He wasn't the only one who knew about this place. Moving silently, Marcus made his way to the stairs and peered up through the crack beneath the trapdoor. Flashlight beams swept across the cabin above, and he could make out at least 3 figures moving systematically through the rooms. They knew what they were looking for. One of the men said something about checking outside, and footsteps moved toward the back of the cabin. Marcus had maybe minutes before they discovered the hidden entrance. He couldn't take all the money. 20 cases would require a truck, but he could take enough to disappear properly this time. Working quickly, he grabbed a canvas bag from one of the shelves and began stuffing it with cash bundles from the nearest case. The bag grew heavy fast, but he forced himself to take only what he could carry while still being able to run. A new voice joined the others above, speaking English with a slight accent. "The GPS tracker in his car shows he's here. Find him." GPS tracker. They'd been following him since Phoenix, maybe longer. Marcus cursed silently as he sealed the cases he'd opened, trying to leave minimal evidence of his presence. If these men worked for whoever owned this money, they might let him live if they thought he hadn't found anything. But the English speaker's next words destroyed that hope. "Rodriguez says the old man might have told him about the cash before he died. We can't take chances." When you find him, make it look like an accident. The old man. Marcus thought about the previous owner of this property, the hermit who'd supposedly died of natural causes 6 months ago. Maybe it hadn't been so natural after all. Heavy footsteps moved directly overhead, and Marcus heard the scrape of furniture being moved. They were being thorough. It would only be a matter of time before they found the trap door. He slung the cash-heavy bag over his shoulder and moved to the back of the underground room where his flashlight had earlier revealed another passage leading deeper into the mountain. He'd assumed it was just a dead-end storage area, but now it might be his only chance. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders, and sloped upward into darkness. Behind him, he heard the trapdoor slam open and excited voices as the men discovered the hidden room. Marcus pushed forward into the unknown tunnel, praying it led somewhere other than his grave. The bag of stolen money felt heavier with each step, a fortune that was already proving more dangerous than he'd imagined. In the distance behind him, angry voices echoed through the underground chamber as the men realized someone had been there first. The floorboards groaned under Marcus's weight as he paced the small cabin, his mind racing through possibilities. 3 hours had passed since his discovery, and the initial shock had crystallized into cold calculation. He'd seen enough crime scenes to know what blood money looked like, and the bills in that case bore all the hallmarks of cartel cash. Bundled tight, vacuum-sealed, and buried deep enough to weather decades. His satellite phone buzzed against the wooden table. Marcus stared at the device, knowing that answering it meant stepping back into a world he'd tried to leave behind. The caller ID showed a number he recognized but hadn't seen in 2 years. Deputy Director Sarah Chen. "Thought you were off the grid permanently." Chen's voice crackled through the static. "I am." Marcus kept his tone neutral. "What do you want, Sarah?" "We have a problem. Intelligence suggests the Vega cartel is moving significant assets through your area. Word is, they're looking for something that went missing during a DEA raid in 2003. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. 20 years ago, the same time frame that case had been buried. What kind of assets? The kind that buy small countries. "Marcus, if you see anything unusual, you call it in immediately. These aren't the type of people who leave witnesses." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down with deliberate care, his hands steadier than they had any right to be. Through the cabin's single window, he watched storm clouds gather over the distant peaks. The weather would provide cover, but it would also trap him here if things went south. A sound outside made him freeze. Engines. Multiple vehicles climbing the narrow mountain road that supposedly led nowhere. Marcus moved to the window, staying low, and counted 3 black SUVs winding their way up the switchbacks. Professional formation, disciplined spacing, not tourists. He had maybe 10 minutes before they reached the cabin. Moving with the efficiency that had once made him the Bureau's best field agent, Marcus grabbed his go-bag and the case of money. The cabin had a root cellar, accessed through a hidden door beneath the kitchen table. He'd discovered it his first week here, noting it as a potential escape route. Now it might save his life. The cellar connected to an old mine shaft that emerged halfway down the mountain. The previous owner had been a prospector with trust issues and excellent survival instincts. Marcus had spent months mapping every tunnel and exit, never imagining he'd need them for anything more serious than avoiding park rangers. As he prepared to descend, Marcus paused. Something nagged at him about Chen's call. She'd known his location despite his careful efforts to stay hidden. The timing felt too convenient, too precise. Either she'd been tracking him for months, or someone had tipped her off about the cartel movement. Neither possibility comforted him. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the thin mountain air. Marcus dropped into the cellar, pulling the concealed door shut above him. Through the floorboards, he heard boots on the cabin's porch, then the splintering crack of forced entry. "Place is clean," a voice called out in accented English. "But someone's been here recently. Coffee's still warm. Check everything. Tear up the floorboards if you have to." This voice carried authority and a distinctly American accent. 20 years we've been looking for this place. It has to be here. Marcus moved through the cellar, using his phone's flashlight to navigate the narrow space. The case felt heavier with each step, weighted not just with money but with the certainty that people would die for what it contained. Above him, the sounds of systematic destruction filled the cabin as the search team worked. He reached the tunnel entrance just as a new voice joined the conversation upstairs. "Agent Collins sends his regards," the newcomer said. "He's very interested in finding our mutual friend." Marcus's blood turned to winter. Collins had been his partner for 6 years, the man who testified against him during the internal investigation that ended his career. If Collins was involved with the cartel, it meant the corruption went deeper than Marcus had ever suspected. The tunnel stretched into absolute darkness, carved from solid rock by men who understood the value of invisible escape routes. Marcus had walked it dozens of times, but never while armed men searched for him overhead. Never while carrying a fortune that belonged to killers. His phone vibrated with a text message. Despite every instinct screaming at him to keep moving, Marcus checked the screen. "We know you have it. Return what was taken and walk away. This is your only warning." The number was Collins's personal cell. Marcus deleted the message and continued into the darkness, the weight of 20 years of buried secrets heavy on his shoulders. Behind him, the sounds of the search grew more frantic, more destructive. They would find the cellar eventually, but by then he'd be gone. The question was, where could a man run when the hunters included both cartels and federal agents? The floorboard creaked under Marcus's weight as he knelt beside the metal chest, his flashlight beam dancing across its weathered surface. The lock had corroded beyond recognition, but the box itself remained intact. He grabbed a crowbar from his toolkit and wedged it under the lid, applying steady pressure until the metal groaned and gave way. What he found inside made his breath catch. Stacks of $100 bills, vacuum-sealed in plastic, filled nearly half the container. Beneath the money lay small canvas bags that clinked softly when he lifted them. Gold coins, their surfaces dulled but unmistakably valuable. At the bottom, wrapped in oiled leather, were documents bearing official seals he recognized from his Burrow days. Drug interdiction reports, asset forfeiture records, names and dates that painted a picture of systematic corruption reaching back decades. Marcus estimated the cash alone at over $2 million. The gold would add another million, maybe more. But the documents, those were either worthless or priceless, depending on who wanted them buried. A branch snapped outside. He killed the flashlight instantly, plunging the cabin into absolute darkness. His hand found the Glock at his hip as he moved to the window, staying low. Through the dirty glass, he caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, 2 figures in dark clothing, advancing with the practiced silence of professionals. They'd found him faster than expected. Marcus grabbed one of the money stacks and stuffed it inside his jacket, then carefully lowered the chest back into its hiding spot. The floorboard slid into place just as footsteps reached the cabin's front porch. He slipped out the back door, grateful for the moonless night that cloaked his retreat into the forest. Behind him, glass shattered. Voices called out in Spanish, confirming his worst suspicions. The Salazar cartel had somehow tracked the treasure's location, which meant someone had been feeding them information, someone with access to federal databases and old case files. Marcus pushed deeper into the woods, using skills he'd honed during countless manhunts. Stay off the trails, move perpendicular to the slope, use the terrain to mask your path. The voices behind him grew more distant, but he knew they wouldn't give up easily. $2 million was worth a lengthy search. 20 minutes later, he reached his truck, hidden in a service road half a mile from the cabin. As he drove away, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. They'd positioned a lookout on the main road, smart tactical thinking that confirmed these weren't street-level thugs, but experienced operators. The chase began in earnest as Marcus accelerated down the winding mountain highway. His pursuers made no attempt at subtlety, closing the distance with their high-powered SUV, A muzzle flash erupted from their passenger window, and his rear windshield exploded in a shower of safety glass. Marcus yanked the wheel hard left, tires screaming as he took a hairpin turn at twice the safe speed. The truck's rear end slid dangerously close to the guardrail and the 100-foot drop beyond it. Another gunshot sparked off his side mirror, and he realized they weren't trying to stop him, they were trying to kill him. That changed everything. He'd assumed they wanted him alive for interrogation, to learn what he'd discovered in the cabin. But if they were shooting to kill, it meant they already had what they needed, or thought they did. The road straightened for a quarter-mile stretch, and Marcus floored the accelerator. His truck wasn't built for speed, but it had torque and weight. When the SUV pulled alongside him, trying to force him off the road, he jerked the wheel right and slammed into their driver's side door. Metal screamed against metal as both vehicles careened toward the shoulder. The SUV's driver overcorrected, sending their vehicle into a wild skid. Marcus watched in his remaining mirror as they spun twice before rolling down the embankment in a cascade of sparks and twisted metal. The night fell silent except for the settling creak of hot metal and his own ragged breathing. He didn't stop to check for survivors. 30 miles down the mountain, Marcus pulled into an all-night diner and used their payphone to call Jake Morrison, his former partner at the Bureau. The conversation was brief and coded, but Jake understood. They arranged to meet at a warehouse in Denver, neutral ground where Marcus could figure out his next move. As he hung up the phone, Marcus caught his reflection in the diner's window. 3 days of stubble, clothes torn from his escape through the woods, eyes that had seen too much violence. He looked like what he'd become, a man caught between his past and a future that promised nothing but trouble. The money in his jacket felt heavier than its actual weight. Every dollar was a link in a chain that connected him to something bigger than a simple treasure hunt. Someone had killed to hide that fortune, and now they'd killed to reclaim it. The question was whether Marcus Chen would live long enough to uncover the truth. The old mining shaft descended into darkness like a throat swallowing light. Marcus played his flashlight beam across the wooden support beams, noting the decades-old rot that made each step downward a gamble. The metal detector's weight pulled at his shoulder as he navigated the treacherous descent, following the crude map he'd found stuffed behind a loose board in the cabin's bedroom. 20 feet down, the shaft opened into a wider chamber carved from living rock. His breath misted in the cool air as he swept the detector's coil across the uneven floor. The device remained silent for long minutes, offering only the occasional ping from discarded mining equipment and rusty nails. Then it screamed. The high-pitched whine sent his pulse racing. Marcus dropped to his knees, clawing at the packed earth with his bare hands. 6 inches down, his fingers struck something hard and metallic, a strongbox, maybe 2 feet long and sealed with a padlock green with age. The lock shattered under 3 blows from his hammer. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas, lay stacks of bills that made his hands shake. Hundreds, thousands, all pristine, all bearing serial numbers from the 1980s. Below the money, a leather journal bound with string. Marcus opened it carefully. The pages contained meticulous records written in Spanish, documenting drug shipments, payment schedules, and names he recognized from old DEA case files. The Herreras. The family had controlled smuggling routes through these mountains for decades before their empire collapsed in a spectacular FBI raid. His raid, the one that had made his reputation before everything went to hell. The journal's final entries told the story. Ramon Herrera, the family patriarch, had stashed his emergency fund here during the heat of the federal investigation. But Ramon never made it back to retrieve his treasure. Marcus had put a bullet in him during the compound raid, ending both the man's life and any hope of recovering this fortune. Until now. Marcus counted the bills twice, hardly believing the numbers. $360,000. Enough to disappear completely, to start over somewhere the ghosts of his past couldn't follow. He stuffed the money into his hiking pack, leaving the journal behind. The climb back to the surface took twice as long with the added weight. His legs trembled from exertion by the time he hauled himself out of the shaft. The afternoon sun felt warm on his face as he caught his breath, but the sensation of being watched made his skin crawl. He wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the tree line 50 yards away, moving with the careful precision of someone accustomed to violence. Latino, heavily built, with the kind of facial scarring that spoke of a hard life. The man's right hand rested casually on something tucked into his waistband. "You find something interesting down there, amigo?" Marcus kept his voice steady. "Just some old mining equipment. Nothing valuable." The stranger smiled without warmth. "My grandfather used to tell stories about these mountains, about money hidden by men who never lived to spend it." He stepped closer, and Marcus could see the grip of a pistol beneath his jacket. "I think maybe you know these stories too. I think maybe you're confused." "Eduardo Herrera," the man touched his chest in mock introduction. "Ramon was my uncle. Family has been looking for his insurance policy for a long time." The pack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Marcus shifted slightly, calculating distances and angles. The nearest cover was a fallen log, 15 feet to his left. His own pistol was holstered at the small of his back, but drawing it meant committing to a firefight he wasn't sure he could win. "Like I said, there's nothing down there but junk." Eduardo's laugh held no humor. "Then you won't mind if I take a look myself, after you show me what's in that pack?" Marcus heard the subtle crunch of footsteps behind him. At least one more, maybe two. They'd boxed him in while he was underground, probably been watching the cabin for hours. Professional work. "Here's what's going to happen," Eduardo continued. "You're going to very slowly remove that pack and set it on the ground. Then you're going to walk away and pretend this never happened. Do that, and you get to see tomorrow." The afternoon breeze stirred the pine branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had always settled over him in moments like this, the hyper-awareness that had kept him alive through dozens of dangerous operations. His fingers flexed slightly, muscle memory preparing for action. "Or what?" Marcus asked. Eduardo's hand moved to his weapon. "Or we take the money anyway and leave you for the bears." Marcus smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "That's funny. I was about to make you the same offer." The silence stretched between them like a wire under tension, waiting for the first wrong move to snap it. The first shot splintered the doorframe inches from Marcus's head as he dove behind the kitchen counter. Glass exploded from the cabin windows as automatic gunfire raked the interior, sending splinters of wood and ceramic flying through the air like deadly confetti. "Federal agents, come out with your hands visible." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. He pressed himself against the cabinet, feeling the vibration of bullets punching through the thin walls above him. His service weapon felt inadequate against what sounded like a small army outside, but it was all he had. The shooting stopped abruptly, leaving only the ringing in his ears and the distant sound of boots crunching on gravel. Through the shattered window, he caught glimpses of tactical gear and the distinctive blue lettering of FBI windbreakers. But something felt wrong. The approach was too aggressive, too shoot-first for a federal operation. "Marcus Kane," the voice carried across the clearing with practiced authority. "You're wanted for questioning in connection with federal crimes. Surrender now and you won't be harmed." Federal crimes. Marcus's mind raced as he low-crawled toward the back of the cabin. They must have connected him to the safety deposit box, but how? He'd been careful, used cash, avoided cameras, unless someone had been watching him from the beginning. A floorboard creaked somewhere near the front door. They were coming in. Marcus slipped through the narrow hallway toward the cabin's rear exit, his shoulders scraping against the log walls. Behind him, he heard the front door crash open and heavy footsteps spreading through the main room. Professional movements, coordinated, but something nagged at him about their formation. He reached the back door and slowly turned the handle. The hinges protested with a soft groan that sounded thunderous in the tense silence. Through the crack, he could see the tree line 20 yards away. Freedom if he could make it. "Clear left. Bedroom clear." The voices were getting closer. Marcus eased the door open wider and prepared to run when he noticed something that made his blood turn cold. Through the gap in the door, he could see a figure positioned behind a tree at the forest's edge. The man wasn't wearing FBI gear. Instead, he sported the kind of tactical vest and weaponry Marcus had seen in DEA intelligence photos of cartel enforcers. This wasn't a federal operation. It was a coordinated hit, using federal credentials as cover. Marcus closed the door silently and backed away from it. If they had the rear exit covered and the front was compromised, his options were rapidly diminishing. The basement, it was his only chance. He found the trapdoor hidden under a small rug in the hallway closet. The wooden ladder descended into darkness, and Marcus dropped down just as footsteps entered the hallway above. The basement was cramped and musty, filled with old mining equipment and forgotten furniture. More importantly, he remembered seeing what looked like an old mine shaft entrance during his earlier exploration. The voices above were methodical, professional, kitchen clear, moving to the back bedroom. Marcus felt his way through the darkness until his hands found the rough-hewn timber framing of the mine entrance. The shaft extended into the mountain, a relic from the area's mining past. He had no idea where it led, but staying meant certain death. Behind him, he heard the scrape of the trapdoor opening. Got a basement access, moving down. The beam of a tactical flashlight swept across the basement floor as Marcus squeezed into the mine shaft. The space was barely wide enough for his shoulders, the ceiling low enough that he had to hunch over to move. Ancient timber supports groaned ominously overhead, and the air tasted of damp earth and decay. He moved as quickly as he dared through the suffocating darkness, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance. Behind him, shouts echoed through the basement as they discovered his escape route. The flashlight beams were getting closer. The shaft curved sharply to the right, and Marcus felt a breath of cooler air against his face. Somewhere ahead was another opening. He pushed forward, ignoring the sharp stones that bit through his jacket and the spider webs that clung to his face. A gunshot boomed through the tunnel, the sound amplified and distorted by the confined space. They were following him into the mine. Marcus stumbled forward and suddenly found himself in a larger chamber. Faint daylight filtered down from somewhere above, another entrance, or perhaps a natural chimney in the rock. But what caught his attention was what lay scattered across the chamber floor: rotted wooden boxes, rusted metal containers, and something that glinted dully in the dim light. Even in his desperate situation, Marcus couldn't help but stare. He'd found more than just a hiding place. He'd found the source of everything, the reason behind the safety deposit box, the map, and now the coordinated attack on the cabin. The voices in the tunnel were getting closer, and Marcus realized he stumbled into something far bigger than a simple treasure hunt. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the mountain's silence like a blade. Marcus pressed himself against the cabin's back wall, heart hammering as he counted the distinct rumble of at least 3 engines winding up the narrow access road. He'd been careless, too focused on the treasure to properly scout his surroundings. Through a gap in the weathered boards, he watched a convoy of black SUVs emerge from the tree line. The lead vehicle bore government plates, but something felt wrong about the formation, too aggressive, too coordinated for a standard federal operation. These weren't investigators following protocol. Marcus recognized the tactical approach immediately. They were moving to surround the cabin, cutting off all escape routes. Professional, deadly. The kind of operation he'd once led himself, back when he wore the badge with pride instead of shame. The vehicle stopped 50 yards out, doors opening with synchronized precision. Men emerged wearing tactical gear, but no visible agency identifiers. That confirmed his worst suspicions. This was off the books, corrupt agents or cartel soldiers, maybe both. The distinction hardly mattered when bullets started flying. A familiar voice carried across the clearing, and Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Agent Rick Castellanos, his former partner, the man who'd testified against him during the corruption hearings, the man who'd destroyed his career while building his own on Marcus's downfall. "We know you're in there, Marcus," Castellanos called out, his tone carrying false friendliness. "Let's talk this through like civilized people. No need for anyone to get hurt." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. Castellanos preaching about civilization while surrounding a cabin with armed mercenaries. The man had always been a hypocrite, but apparently corruption suited him even better than righteousness had. "You're trespassing on federal land," Marcus shouted back, buying time while his mind raced through options. The treasure was still partially exposed in the cabin's floor, 3 duffel bags of cash representing more money than he'd seen in several lifetimes. But money meant nothing if he was dead. "Actually, we're conducting an official investigation," Castellanos replied. "Reports of suspicious activity in the area." Imagine my surprise when the description matched a certain disgraced ex-agent with a history of poor decision-making. The insult stung because it carried truth. Marcus had made poor decisions, trusted the wrong people, let greed cloud his judgment during the Ramirez investigation. But he'd never crossed the line Castellanos was dancing across now. Movement in his peripheral vision caught Marcus's attention. 2 men were flanking the cabin's east side while Castellanos kept him talking. Standard breach protocol, distraction while assault teams positioned. Marcus had maybe 30 seconds before they made their move. He grabbed one of the duffel bags, its weight substantial but manageable. The money would be worthless if he couldn't stay alive long enough to spend it. Through the back window, he spotted his escape route, a steep slope leading down toward the creek bed, covered in dense undergrowth. "Tell me, Rick," Marcus called out, edging toward the window. "Does the Bureau know you're moonlighting as a treasure hunter? Or are you keeping this little expedition off the official books?" The silence that followed confirmed everything. Castellanos was dirty, probably had been for years. The corruption investigation that had destroyed Marcus's career had been a convenient cover, allowing Castellanos to eliminate a potential threat while appearing righteous. Glass exploded inward as the first tactical team breached the front windows. Marcus was already moving, diving through the back window as automatic weapons fire shredded the cabin's interior. Wood splinters erupted around him as he hit the ground hard, rolling down the steep slope with a duffel bag clutched against his chest. Shouts erupted from above as his pursuers realized their prey had escaped the trap. Marcus crashed through underbrush, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. The bag's weight threw off his balance, sending him tumbling faster than controlled descent allowed. He slammed into a fallen log, breath exploding from his lungs. Above, flashlight beams swept the slope as Castellanos' team organized pursuit. Marcus forced himself upright, every muscle screaming protest. The creek gurgled somewhere ahead in the darkness. "Fan out!" Castellanos' voice carried clearly in the thin mountain air. "He's got something worth killing for, or he wouldn't have run. Find him!" Marcus reached the creek bed, icy water soaking through his boots as he splashed downstream. The current would mask his tracks, buy him precious time. Behind him, the cabin burned orange against the night sky. They were destroying evidence, eliminating any trace of their presence. The water numbed his legs as he pushed forward, guided only by starlight filtering through the forest canopy. Each step took him further from immediate danger, but deeper into wilderness that could kill him just as efficiently as bullets. Somewhere in the darkness behind him, hunters were coming. Marcus had the money, but Castellanos had resources, manpower, and the ruthless determination of someone with everything to lose. The real game was just beginning. Marcus's hands trembled as he stared at the satellite phone's display. 3 missed calls from Elena Vasquez, the DEA agent who'd tried to warn him about the Sinaloa cartel's interest in the cabin. The last voicemail was time-stamped just 20 minutes ago. "They know you found something." Her voice crackled through the speaker. "My sources say Victor Kozlov is mobilizing his entire crew. You need to disappear, Marcus. Now." He clicked off the phone and surveyed the carnage around him. 2 bodies lay cooling in the morning frost outside the cabin, members of the advanced team he'd eliminated during the pre-dawn firefight. Their blood had already begun to attract ravens, black shapes circling overhead like harbingers of worse things to come. The fortune beneath the floorboards represented 30 years of dirty money from a federal task force gone rogue. Agent Thompson's hidden confession detailed how his team had systematically skimmed from cartel seizures, mob operations, and witness protection funds. The final entry, dated 3 days before Thompson's accidental death, revealed his growing paranoia about his partners wanting him eliminated. Marcus loaded the last duffel bag into the stolen pickup truck, his ribs screaming in protest. The previous night's battle had left him battered but victorious, though he knew it was merely the opening round. Kozlov wouldn't send another small team. Next time it would be an army. The mountain road stretched before him, winding through dense pine forests that could hide a dozen ambushes. His original plan to disappear with the money seemed increasingly naive. Too many people knew about the cabin now. Too many wanted him dead. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We have Elena cabin, 1 hour. Come alone or she dies slowly." Marcus pulled over and studied the message. Either it was a trap using Elena's name as bait, or the DEA agent had somehow gotten herself captured while trying to help him. Neither scenario offered good options, but leaving Elena to die wasn't acceptable, not after she'd risked her career to warn him. He reversed direction and headed back toward the cabin, checking his weapons inventory. The dead men had provided him with additional ammunition and a pair of military-grade radios. Their truck, abandoned a quarter-mile down the mountain, might still contain useful supplies. The cabin came into view 30 minutes later. 2 black SUVs flanked the building, and Marcus counted at least 4 figures moving around the perimeter. Professional positioning, overlapping fields of fire. These weren't street thugs or cartel foot soldiers. Someone had sent genuine operators. Through his binoculars, he spotted Elena tied to a chair on the cabin's front porch, visible from multiple angles. A classic trap setup, forcing him to approach across open ground while marksmen waited in concealment. Marcus circled wide through the forest, using deer trails and natural cover to reach the ridge overlooking the cabin. The tactical radio he'd taken from the dead men suddenly crackled to life. "Target hasn't shown. Maybe he's smarter than we thought. Kozlov wants this finished today. The Sinaloa people are already moving north. If we don't control the situation soon, this becomes a 3-way war. What about the girl? She's DEA. Killing her brings heat we don't need. But if Pierce doesn't show in the next 15 minutes, we improvise." Marcus recognized the voice of the team leader, a gravelly tone that suggested military experience. Former special forces, probably, like many private contractors who worked for criminal organizations, men who'd traded honor for money and convinced themselves it was just another form of service. The ridge position offered a clear shot at 2 of the sentries, but taking them down would expose his location to the others. Elena sat motionless in the chair, her head drooping forward in a way that suggested either unconsciousness or death. If she was already gone, walking into the trap served no purpose except satisfying his guilt. Movement in the trees below caught his attention. A 5th man was climbing toward his position, having apparently spotted some trace of Marcus's passage. The hunter was about to become the hunted, unless Marcus acted quickly. He slipped down slope through a cluster of boulders, circling behind the approaching gunman. The man moved with professional caution, but Marcus had spent years tracking fugitives through terrain just like this. When the opportunity presented itself, Marcus struck with swift brutality, his knife finding the gap between spine and skull. The radio provided an immediate update on the team's growing anxiety. They'd lost contact with their climbing scout and were beginning to suspect they'd underestimated their target. Good, uncertainty bred mistakes, and Marcus needed them making plenty of mistakes if he hoped to survive the next hour. Elena stirred slightly in her chair, confirming she was still alive. The rescue mission remained viable, but it would require precision, patience, and a healthy dose of luck. Marcus checked his watch and began moving toward his next position. Time to turn the hunters into prey. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the mountain air like a death knell. Marcus pressed himself against the cabin's rear wall, his heart hammering as he counted at least 3 distinct engine sounds growing closer. Through a gap in the weathered boards, He watched dust clouds rise from the access road below. His mind raced through options, each one bleaker than the last. The briefcase containing nearly 2 million in bearer bonds sat heavy in his grip, but it might as well have been an anchor dragging him toward the bottom of a very deep lake. The remaining fortune still lay buried beneath the cabin's floorboards, but accessing it now would be suicide. The engines cut off simultaneously, followed by the metallic slam of car doors. Voices carried on the thin air, some speaking rapid Spanish, others in clipped English with distinctly federal cadences. The cartels and his former colleagues had found him, and from the sound of it, they were working together. Marcus slipped around the cabin's corner, keeping low as he made his way toward the tree line. The dense forest offered his only chance of escape, but he'd need to move fast before they established a perimeter. His boots found purchase on the rocky ground as he crept toward a cluster of pine trees 30 yards away. "Spread out!" came a familiar voice that made his blood freeze. Agent Sarah Chen, his former partner, was leading the operation. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd expected, even though he should have seen it coming. In their line of work, loyalty was a luxury few could afford. Marcus reached the tree line just as armed figures appeared around the cabin's front corner. Through the branches, he caught glimpses of tactical gear and assault rifles. These weren't just investigators, they'd come prepared for war. "He's been here recently," Chen's voice carried clearly. "Coffee's still warm. Check the perimeter, but watch for booby traps." Marcus always was paranoid. The irony wasn't lost on him. Paranoia was the only reason he was still breathing. Moving deeper into the forest, Marcus kept the briefcase clutched tight while his free hand felt for obstacles in the dim light filtering through the canopy. Every snapped twig beneath his feet sounded like a gunshot to his ears, but he forced himself to maintain a steady pace. Panic would get him killed faster than bullets. Behind him, shouts erupted from the cabin. They'd found the disturbed floorboards and the empty hiding spots. It wouldn't take them long to realize he'd beaten them to the prize, at least partially. The question was whether they'd assume he'd taken everything or if they'd keep searching. A branch cracked to his left, followed by the rustle of undergrowth. Marcus froze, pressing himself against a massive pine trunk. Through the forest gloom, he spotted a figure in black tactical gear moving parallel to his position, sweeping the area with practiced efficiency. The man was good, but he was following standard search patterns. Marcus had trained half these agents himself, which meant he knew their weaknesses. They'd expect him to move uphill toward higher ground, or to head for the main road. They wouldn't anticipate him circling back. Marcus waited until the searcher passed, then began a careful retreat toward the cabin. The maneuver went against every instinct screaming at him to put distance between himself and the armed professionals hunting him, but sometimes the most dangerous path was the safest. As he moved, fragments of conversation drifted through the trees. The cartels were growing impatient, demanding immediate results. Chen was trying to maintain operational control, but the dynamic was shifting. These weren't partners, they were predators circling the same prey, and their alliance would crumble the moment they had what they wanted. That instability might be his only advantage. Marcus reached a position where he could observe the cabin clearing. 2 black SUVs and a modified pickup truck sat in a rough semicircle, their occupants having fanned out to establish a search perimeter. But their positioning revealed a crucial flaw. They'd left the vehicles lightly guarded, assuming he was already deep in the forest. He studied the tactical situation with the cold calculation that had once made him the Bureau's most effective field agent. The pickup truck sat closest to the tree line, its engine still ticking as it cooled. If he could reach it unseen, the vehicle's off-road capabilities might give him the edge he needed to escape through terrain the SUVs couldn't navigate. The briefcase felt heavier with each passing moment, its weight a constant reminder of what he'd gained and what he'd lost. $2 million should have been enough to disappear forever, to start fresh somewhere beyond the reach of cartels and corrupt agents. But as boots crashed through the underbrush around him and voices called out coordinates, Marcus realized the biggest discovery of his life might also be his last. The hunt was closing in, and he was running out of moves. The satellite phone's shrill ring cut through the mountain silence like a blade. Marcus froze, his hand halfway to the shovel he'd been using to clear debris from the cabin's foundation. 3 days had passed since he'd found the first metal case buried beneath the floorboards, and he'd told no one about his discovery. "Chen," he answered on the second ring, eyes scanning the tree line. "Marcus, it's Sarah. We have a problem." His former partner's voice crackled through the static. "Intel suggests the Valdez cartel is moving assets north. Word is they're looking for something specific in your area." His blood chilled. "What kind of something?" "Money, a lot of it. Apparently their former accountant buried a fortune somewhere in the Colorado Rockies before he disappeared. They've been hunting for it for months." Marcus's gaze drifted to the loose soil behind the cabin where he'd reburied the case after examining its contents. Nearly $2 million in unmarked bills, vacuum-sealed and pristine. He'd assumed it was old bootlegger money, maybe a bank robber's stash from decades past. The cartel connection changed everything. How close are they? Close enough that you need to disappear. Tonight. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest. Marcus dropped to one knee behind a fallen log, the phone pressed to his ear. "Sarah, I think it might be too late for that." Through the pines, he caught a glimpse of movement. Dark clothing, tactical gear, at least 3 figures advancing with military precision. "They're here," he whispered. "Call the locals." "Marcus." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket. The nearest sheriff's station was 40 minutes away on mountain roads. He was on his own. The first gunshot splintered the tree above his head. Marcus rolled left, using the cabin's bulk for cover as automatic weapons fire erupted from the forest. Bark and splinters exploded around him as he sprinted for the back door. Inside, he grabbed the Glock from beneath his mattress and the emergency pack he always kept ready. Old habits from his bureau days. Through the front window, he spotted 2 more figures flanking the cabin from the east. 5 total. Professional movement, coordinated timing. These weren't street thugs. They were cartel soldiers. The back window exploded inward as Marcus dove behind the kitchen counter. Glass showered across the floor as boots thundered on the front porch. Spanish voices shouted coordinates, closing the net. He had maybe 30 seconds before they breached both doors simultaneously. Marcus yanked open the trap door he'd cut in the kitchen floor 3 days earlier. The tunnel beneath was crude but functional. He dug it after finding the money, knowing someone might eventually come looking. It led 20 yards through the rocky soil to emerge behind a boulder outcropping. The front door burst open as he dropped into the narrow shaft. Flashlight beams swept the cabin above, while he crawled through the darkness, dirt cascading into his eyes and mouth. The tunnel seemed endless, every second expecting bullets to punch through the floorboards above. He emerged gasping behind the rocks just as flames began licking at the cabin windows. They were torching his hideout, destroying any evidence of his presence. Smart and ruthless. From his concealed position, Marcus watched the cartel team work with practiced efficiency. Their leader, a lean man with silver temples, directed the search with hand signals. They weren't just looking for money, they were hunting for him too, someone who could identify the burial site. The leader's radio crackled. Marcus caught fragments of Spanish, something about El Contador and Mapa, the accountant, and a map. They believed their missing money man had left directions to the cache. What they didn't know was that the accountant was probably dead, and there was no map. Marcus had found the money by pure chance while repairing the cabin's foundation. The metal case had been buried beneath the original structure, hidden for months or maybe years. As the fire consumed his temporary home, Marcus made his decision. The smart play was to run, to disappear into the mountains and let the cartel search forever. But $2 million could change everything, pay off old debts, fund a new identity, maybe even allow him to stop running. The cartel team was already spreading out, beginning a systematic search of the surrounding area. They'd find the disturbed earth behind the cabin soon enough. But Marcus had moved the money again after Sarah's call, relocating it to a more secure hiding spot deeper in the forest. Now, He just had to survive long enough to retrieve it. The silver-haired leader barked new orders, and his team began advancing into the tree line with thermal scopes and military-grade equipment. They were professionals, but they were hunting on his territory now. Marcus checked his weapon and melted into the shadows between the pines. The real game was just beginning, and he intended to win it. The money was his ticket to freedom, if he could live long enough to claim it. The satellite phone's shrill ring cut through the mountain silence like a blade. Marcus stared at the device, knowing that answering it would likely seal his fate one way or another. 3 rings. 4. He pressed the accept button. "You have something that belongs to us." The voice was smooth, accented with what sounded like educated Mexican Spanish. "Funny, I thought it belonged to whoever buried it under my cabin," Marcus replied, scanning the tree line through his scope. "Which, last I checked, wasn't you," a low chuckle. "Senor Webb, my name is Eduardo Vargas. Perhaps you've heard of me?" Marcus had. Vargas ran one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations along the southwestern border, the kind of man who wore $1,000 suits while ordering executions. "I've heard you're not the type to make social calls. The money you've discovered represents 2 years of careful planning, a reserve fund for operations that are critical to my organization's future. I'm prepared to offer you 10% to walk away." Marcus calculated quickly. 10% of 43 million was still life-changing money, but he'd learned long ago that deals with devils rarely ended well for the other party. Generous. But I'm thinking more along the lines of 90%. You know, finder's fee. The silence stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the connection had dropped. Then Vargas spoke again, his voice carrying a new edge. "You killed 4 of my men yesterday. They killed themselves by bringing guns to my property. I just helped them along. There will be more, many more. And I know about your friend Sarah Chen, the Treasury agent who's been asking uncomfortable questions about certain financial irregularities. It would be unfortunate if something happened to her." Marcus felt ice form in his chest. Sarah had been his lifeline during the suspension, one of the few people in federal law enforcement who still believed he'd been set up. If Vargas knew about her, the cartel's reach was longer than he'd imagined. Touch her, and our negotiation ends permanently. Then perhaps we understand each other. You have until sunset tomorrow to transfer the funds to an account I'll provide. Refuse, and Miss Chen dies slowly, very slowly. The line went dead. Marcus lowered the phone, his hands steady despite the fury building inside him. He'd been in tight spots before, but never with an innocent's life hanging in the balance. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest below. Marcus swung his rifle toward the sound, tracking movement through the scope. A figure in tactical gear was advancing through the underbrush, moving with the practiced stealth of a professional. Then he saw another, and another. They'd found him faster than expected. Marcus counted at least 6 men forming a loose perimeter around the cabin. These weren't the street soldiers from yesterday. Their movement patterns and equipment suggested military training. Marcus keyed his radio to the emergency frequency Sarah had given him months ago. "Phoenix, this is Raven. Priority Alpha." Static. Then Sarah's voice, tense and low. "Marcus? Thank God. Half the Bureau's looking for you. There's a bolo out claiming you've gone rogue. Listen carefully. Eduardo Vargas has your name. Get somewhere safe now." "Vargas? The money launderer? How does he—" "Long story. You need to disappear until this is over. I'm not running from some cartel pretty boy. Besides, I've got news. Those account numbers you found? I traced them. The money isn't just cartel cash. It's FBI seizure funds that went missing 3 years ago." Marcus felt the pieces clicking together. The Meridian bust. Exactly. 43 million that was supposed to go into federal coffers just vanished. Internal Affairs buried the investigation, claimed it was a clerical error. The Meridian case had been Marcus's last major operation before everything went wrong. A joint task force targeting a massive drug distribution network. He remembered the seizures, the mountain of cash they'd recovered, and he remembered the team leader who'd overseen the evidence processing, Agent Derek Morrison, the same man who'd later testified that Marcus had been taking bribes. Morrison was dirty, Marcus breathed. Gets better. Guess who's been reassigned to lead the task force hunting you? Through his scope, Marcus watched the tactical team tighten their noose. Morrison had played a longer game than anyone realized. Frame Marcus for corruption, steal the money, then hide it in the most remote location he could find. It might have stayed buried forever if Marcus hadn't inherited the cabin. Sarah, get out, now. Morrison knows you're investigating, already moving. But Marcus, what? The transfer logs show the money was moved to your location 2 days after your suspension hearing. Morrison's had almost 3 years to retrieve it. Why didn't he? A rifle crack echoed across the mountain, and bark exploded from a tree inches from Marcus's head. The assault team had spotted him. Because, Marcus said, rolling away from the window as more shots followed, something went wrong. He dropped the radio and grabbed his rifle. Time for answers later. Right now, survival was the only priority. The explosion threw Marcus 20 feet backward into the tree line, his ears ringing like cathedral bells. Dirt and splintered wood rained down as he struggled to his feet, tasting copper and ash. Through the smoke and debris he could see the cabin, or what remained of it, engulfed in orange flames that licked hungrily at the night sky. Vasquez emerged from behind a boulder 50 yards away, an RPG launcher still smoking in his hands. Behind him, 6 sicarios spread out in a practiced assault formation, their automatic weapons gleaming in the firelight. The cartel boss's face was a mask of cold fury beneath his tactical vest. "You cost me everything, Agent Kane," Vasquez called out, his accent thick with rage. "My operation, my men, my reputation. Did you think you could just disappear into these mountains?" Marcus pressed himself against a thick pine, checking his weapons. The Glock was still holstered, but his rifle had been lost in the blast. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, and his left shoulder screamed in protest when he moved. The briefcase containing the bearer bonds was nowhere to be seen, probably vaporized along with everything else. A burst of automatic fire chewed bark from the tree inches from his head. They were advancing, using overlapping fields of fire to pin him down. Professional, disciplined, deadly. He thought of Sarah, probably halfway to the Canadian border by now with the gold coins. At least she had escaped this nightmare. At least something good had come from this disaster. Movement to his left caught his attention. 2 sicarios were flanking wide, trying to get behind him. Marcus broke cover and sprinted deeper into the forest, bullets whining past his ears like angry hornets. The terrain worked in his favor here, steep ravines and dense undergrowth that would slow down their coordinated advance. Behind him, he could hear Vasquez shouting orders in rapid Spanish. Flashlight beams danced between the trees, creating a deadly light show in the darkness. These weren't street thugs. They moved like special forces, probably ex-military recruited from Mexican or Guatemalan elite units. Marcus slid down a rocky embankment, using the momentum to leap across a narrow creek. His boots splashed in the icy water before finding purchase on the far bank. The sound of pursuit grew closer, cracking branches, muffled voices, the distinctive metallic click of magazines being reloaded. The old ranger trail wound upward through a stand of aspen, their white bark ghostly in the moonlight. Marcus had hiked this path before, years ago when the mountains had represented escape rather than entrapment. He knew it led to a series of switchbacks that climbed toward Eagle's Peak, treacherous ground where one misstep could mean 100-foot fall. A rifle cracked somewhere behind him, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the trees. Too close. They were gaining ground despite the difficult terrain. Marcus pushed harder, his lungs burning in the thin air, sweat mixing with blood on his face. The trail curved around a massive granite outcropping, and Marcus saw his chance. He scrambled up the rock face, using handholds worn smooth by decades of weather. His shoulder protested violently, but adrenaline carried him upward until he found a narrow ledge 20 feet above the path. Seconds later, the first Sicario rounded the bend below, night vision goggles giving him an insectoid appearance. Marcus held his breath, pressing himself flat against the cold stone. 2 more followed, then Vasquez himself, scanning the darkness with predatory intensity. "He's close," the cartel boss murmured into his radio. "The trail goes up from here. Send Ramirez and Torres around the north face. We'll drive him toward the cliff." They were going to box him in. Marcus waited until the last man passed beneath his position, then dropped silently onto the trail. The Glock appeared in his hand as if by magic, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. The rear guard turned at the last second, eyes widening in recognition. Marcus put 2 rounds center mass before the man could raise his weapon. The body crumpled without a sound, but the shots echoed through the canyon like thunder. Shouts erupted ahead as the hunting party realized their quarry had become the hunter. Marcus dragged the dead Sicario off the trail and stripped him of ammunition and grenades. The man's radio crackled with frantic Spanish, Vasquez trying to regroup his scattered forces. The wind shifted, carrying the acrid smell of the burning cabin up from the valley below. Along with it came another sound that made Marcus's blood run cold, helicopter rotors, still distant but approaching fast. Vasquez had called in reinforcements. Marcus keyed the dead man's radio and spoke in perfect, unaccented Spanish. "This is Agent Marcus Kane, formerly of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a proposition for you, Vasquez." The radio fell silent for a long moment before the cartel boss's voice crackled back. "I'm listening, you son of a bitch. Single combat. You and me. Winner takes all." Vasquez's laughter was like broken glass. "You have nothing left to bargain with, Kane. Your treasure burned with that cabin." Marcus smiled grimly in the darkness. "That's where you're wrong." The helicopter's rotors cut through the mountain air like a mechanical predator, its searchlight sweeping across the forest canopy in methodical arcs. Marcus pressed himself deeper into the rocky outcropping, feeling the cold stone bite into his back as the light passed overhead for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. They were getting closer. His satellite phone buzzed against his chest, a text from Elena. 2 teams closing from north and south, maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes to move $3 million in cash and gold bars. Marcus almost laughed at the impossibility of it. The fortune that had seemed like salvation 12 hours ago now felt like an anchor dragging him toward the bottom of a very dark ocean. The searchlight moved away, and Marcus broke from cover, sprinting toward the cabin. His lungs burned in the thin air, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Inside, Sarah was shoving the last of the gold bars into military-grade duffel bags, her movements efficient despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't carry all of this," she said without looking up. "Not if we want to move fast. Then we take what we can and destroy the rest." Marcus grabbed 2 bags, testing their weight. 60 pounds each, manageable but not for a long chase through mountain terrain. "Where's Chen?" "Setting charges around the perimeter. He says we have maybe 15 minutes before—" The sharp crack of rifle fire cut through her words. Both of them froze, listening to the echo bounce between the peaks. Then Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "Contact! 3 vehicles coming up the access road. They're not waiting for backup." Marcus cursed under his breath. Kozlov's men were moving faster than expected. The Russian had always been impatient, but this felt desperate. Someone had pushed him into acting before he was ready. "Change of plans," Marcus said, shouldering both bags. "We go out the back and up the ridge. There's an old mining trail that leads to the highway." Sarah grabbed the remaining bag and Marcus's laptop case. "What about the rest?" Marcus pulled a thermite grenade from his pack, the weight of it familiar in his hand. "Insurance." They slipped out the back door as the sound of engines grew louder. The forest was alive with movement, distant shouts, the crackle of radio chatter, the systematic sweep of multiple teams closing in. Marcus led Sarah up a steep game trail, using the trees for cover as the helicopter circled back toward their position. Behind them, the cabin erupted in light as Kozlov's men kicked in the front door. Marcus could hear their frustrated Russian curses even from 50 yards away. They'd found the hidden vault, but most of the prize was already gone. The mining trail was overgrown and treacherous, but it angled away from the main search pattern. Marcus's FBI training kicked in, reading the terrain like a tactical map. They needed elevation and distance, but more than that, they needed to think like prey instead of predators. "Stop," Sarah whispered, grabbing his arm. "Listen." Marcus held his breath. Through the forest sounds he caught it, the soft crunch of boots on pine needles moving parallel to their position. Someone was tracking them, staying just out of sight. He motioned for Sarah to keep moving while he melted into the shadows beside a massive pine. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the soft hiss of radio static. A figure emerged from behind a boulder, tactical gear, night vision goggles, professional movement patterns, not cartel muscle. This was someone with training. Marcus recognized the silhouette and felt his blood turn cold. Agent Morrison, his former partner from the FBI, the man who'd helped orchestrate his downfall 2 years ago, was now hunting him through a Colorado forest. Morrison spoke softly into his radio, lost visual contact. "They're moving north toward the mining road." He paused, listening to the response. "Roger that. I'll cut them off at the bridge." As Morrison moved away, Marcus caught a fragment of the radio chatter. "Director wants them alive. Questions about Phoenix operation." Phoenix. The code name hit Marcus like a physical blow. They'd found him not because of the fortune, but because of what he'd uncovered about the FBI's connection to the cartel money in the first place. The buried treasure was just the tip of something much larger and darker. Marcus caught up to Sarah at a rocky overlook. Below them, vehicle lights crawled along mountain roads like fireflies, systematically cutting off escape routes. The helicopter had been joined by a second aircraft, their synchronized search patterns revealing a level of coordination that made his stomach clench. "We're not just running from criminals," he told Sarah, checking his weapon. "The FBI is here. This whole thing goes deeper than we thought." Sarah's face went pale in the moonlight. "How deep?" Before Marcus could answer, Chen's voice exploded over the radio. "They found the cache. Repeat, they found the main cache. Marcus, they're not just after the money. They're downloading everything from your backup drives." The laptop case felt suddenly heavy in Sarah's hands. Inside were copies of every file, every transaction record, every piece of evidence Marcus had gathered about the Phoenix operation. If those files fell into the wrong hands, a lot of people were going to die, including them. The satellite phone crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jarring Marcus from his restless sleep against the cabin wall. Elena's voice cut through the static, urgent and breathless. "They found us. Rodriguez has 20 men moving up the North Ridge. You've got maybe an hour." Marcus rolled to his feet, his ribs screaming in protest. The makeshift barricades he'd constructed wouldn't hold against that kind of force. Through the shattered window, he could see the first grey hints of dawn creeping across the mountain peaks. "What about the South Trail?" he whispered into the phone. "Blocked." Hernandez positioned snipers at the overlook. Elena's transmission wavered as she moved. "There's only one way out, and it runs right through them." Marcus closed his eyes, running calculations. The fortune remained buried beneath the cabin's floorboards, 200 million in bearer bonds and uncut diamonds that had started this nightmare. Every instinct screamed at him to grab what he could carry and run, but the tactical part of his mind knew better. Rodriguez wouldn't stop hunting him, not with that much money at stake. "Where are you now?" he asked. "Quarter mile east, moving to intercept their flanking team." "Marcus, listen to me. There's something else." I intercepted their radio chatter. Agent Davidson isn't just coordinating with Rodriguez. He's here, on the mountain. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Davidson had been his partner for 6 years, had testified at his disciplinary hearing, had promised to help clear his name. Now the corrupt FBI agent was personally overseeing his execution. "Copy that," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Elena, I need you to do something for me." He outlined his plan in whispered fragments, using the tactical shorthand they'd developed during their desperate alliance. It was insane, requiring perfect timing and more luck than any sane person would rely on, but it was the only play that gave them both a chance to survive. 20 minutes later, Marcus heard the first boots crunching through the frost outside. He'd positioned himself in the cabin's back room, behind an overturned table he'd reinforced with torn floorboards. The fortune lay exposed in the hole beneath the main room, visible bait that would draw Rodriguez's men exactly where he needed them. The front door exploded inward under the impact of a breaching charge. Smoke grenades followed, filling the cabin with choking grey clouds. Through his improvised gas mask, a wet bandana that barely helped, Marcus counted boots, voices, tactical positions. "Target's not here," someone shouted. "But Jesus, look at this." They'd found the money. "Don't touch anything," Davidson's voice cut through the chaos. "Rodriguez wants a full inventory before we move it." Marcus heard the cartel leader's heavy footsteps entering the cabin. Through a gap in his barricade, he watched Rodriguez approach the treasure like a man approaching an altar. The drug lord's scarred face showed something approaching reverence as he knelt beside the fortune that had already cost so many lives. 20 years I've hunted this," Rodriguez murmured. 20 years since those DEA agents stole it from my compound in Juarez." "Ancient history," Davidson said, his Bureau-issued tactical gear a stark contrast to the cartel soldiers surrounding him. "What matters now is eliminating witnesses. Where's Turner? My sources say he's already heading down the mountain. We'll catch him at the roadblock." Rodriguez nodded, then barked orders in rapid Spanish. Half his men filed back outside to continue the hunt, while the rest began extracting the fortune from its hiding place. Marcus counted 6 men remaining in the cabin, plus Davidson and Rodriguez himself. He pressed the transmit button on his radio twice, the signal Elena was waiting for. The explosion that followed wasn't dramatic. Elena had positioned charges taken from Rodriguez's own demolition supplies at strategic points around the cabin's foundation. The goal wasn't destruction, but distraction, and it worked perfectly. The cabin tilted violently to one side as support beams collapsed. Men shouted and stumbled in the chaos. Rodriguez dove protectively over the scattered bonds and diamonds, while Davidson cursed into his radio, trying to re-establish contact with his perimeter teams. Marcus moved in that moment of confusion, emerging from his hiding spot with the M4 rifle he'd taken from the first cartel soldier he'd killed 2 days ago. His shots were precise, targeting center mass of the 3 closest threats before anyone could react. Rodriguez rolled behind an overturned cabinet, automatic pistol already in his hand. "Turner! I should have known you were too stubborn to run." "Funny thing about being framed for murder," Marcus called back, shifting position as return fire chewed through the wooden wall beside him. "It really motivates a man to seek justice." Davidson's voice rose above the gunfire. "This ends now, Marcus. You're surrounded and outgunned. Surrender, and I'll make sure you get a clean death." Marcus smiled grimly, checking his remaining ammunition. Through the smoke and chaos, he could see Elena's silhouette moving past the window. Phase 2 was about to begin. The helicopter's rotors cut through the dawn air like a metallic heartbeat, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone of the cave entrance, watching as the aircraft circled the cabin site below. Through his binoculars, he could see armed figures rappelling down thick black ropes, their tactical gear gleaming in the early morning light. "Ramirez doesn't waste time," he muttered, adjusting his grip on the assault rifle he'd taken from one of yesterday's casualties. The weight felt familiar in his hands, muscle memory from his Bureau days flooding back, despite the years that had passed. Behind him, deeper in the cave system, lay the fortune that had started this nightmare. Gold bars, bearer bonds, and cash, enough to buy a small country or paint a very large target on anyone foolish enough to claim it. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent his career chasing criminals who killed for far less than what now sat within arm's reach. The helicopter touched down near the smoking ruins of the cabin. Marcus counted 8 men emerging, all carrying military-grade weapons. These weren't cartel soldiers. Their movements were too precise, too coordinated. These were professionals, likely the same corrupt federal agents who'd been feeding information to Ramirez's organization. Marcus checked his watch. Sarah should be reaching the ranger station by now, assuming she'd made it through the night without running into any of Ramirez's advance teams. He'd given her the satellite phone and explicit instructions to contact Deputy Director Chen directly, bypassing the normal channels that had been compromised. Whether Chen would believe her story was another matter entirely. Movement below caught his attention. The tactical team had found the entrance to the mining complex. 2 men disappeared underground while the others took defensive positions around the perimeter. Marcus knew he had perhaps 10 minutes before they discovered the cave system extended far beyond the main chamber where the fortune was hidden. He'd spent the early hours of the morning preparing for this moment, rigging improvised explosives at key choke points throughout the tunnel network. The materials had come from the mining equipment left behind decades ago, dynamite that's probably older than he was, but still potent enough to bring down tons of rock if properly deployed. The question wasn't whether he could escape with his life. The question was whether he wanted to walk away empty-handed after everything he'd sacrificed to get here. His radio crackled to life. "Phoenix, this is Raven 1. We have visual on the target location. Beginning sweep now." Marcus smiled grimly. They were using his old FBI call sign, probably pulled from his personnel file. Someone had done their homework, but not well enough. They didn't know about the secondary exit he'd discovered on the far side of the mountain, or the cache of supplies he'd hidden there during his first night at the cabin. "Copy that, Raven 1, came the reply. "Remember, we need Phoenix alive. The client has questions that need answering." The client. That confirmed Marcus's suspicions about who was really behind this operation. Ramirez might be providing the muscle, but someone with serious political connections was pulling the strings. Someone who knew about the fortune's existence and had been waiting for years for an opportunity to claim it. Marcus made his decision. He activated the first set of charges, bringing down a section of tunnel that would force the tactical team to take the long way around to reach his position. The explosion echoed through the mountain like thunder, sending birds scattering from the trees below. Now they knew exactly where he was, but it didn't matter. He wasn't hiding anymore. Moving quickly through the familiar passages, Marcus made his way toward the chamber where the fortune waited. If he couldn't claim it himself, he could at least ensure that Ramirez and his corrupt federal allies wouldn't get their hands on it either. The remaining explosives would be enough to seal the cave permanently, burying the treasure under millions of tons of granite. As he reached the chamber, his radio erupted with angry voices. The tactical team had found the blocked tunnel and was regrouping. They'd be coming at him from multiple directions now, using their superior numbers to flush him out of the cave system. Marcus looked at the stacks of gold bars one last time, thinking about all the lives that had been lost in pursuit of this forgotten fortune, the original owners, whoever they were, the mining crew that had hidden it, Agent Collins who died trying to protect him, even some of Ramirez's soldiers, just following orders from men who saw them as expendable. He pulled out the detonator, his thumb hovering over the trigger. In 30 seconds he could end this permanently. Or he could try one last desperate gambit to escape with enough of the fortune to disappear forever. The sound of approaching footsteps made the decision for him. The explosion echoed through the mountains like thunder, shaking snow from the pine branches overhead. Marcus pressed himself against the cold granite outcropping, feeling the vibrations travel through the stone into his bones. Through the settling dust and debris he could see the cabin, or what remained of it, consumed by orange flames that licked hungrily at the night sky. "Son of a bitch actually did it," he whispered, watching Kozlov emerge from the tree line with a rocket launcher slung over his shoulder. The Russian's scarred face was illuminated by the fire, twisted into something resembling satisfaction. Behind Marcus, Sarah's breathing came in short, panicked bursts. "The money, it's all gone. Everything we went through, everything we—" "No," Marcus grabbed her shoulder, steadying her. "The real cache isn't in the cabin. Remember the survey maps? Your grandfather was smarter than that. The cabin was just the decoy." Sarah's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "The mine shaft. He hid it in the abandoned mine shaft we passed on the ridge." Marcus nodded, then peered around the rocks again. Kozlov was advancing toward the burning remains, two of his men flanking him with automatic weapons. They moved with military precision, sweeping their barrels across potential hiding spots. In the distance, Marcus could make out at least 3 more figures positioned at strategic points around the perimeter. "We need to move while they're distracted," he said, checking his pistol. 4 rounds left, not nearly enough against Kozlov's small army. They began working their way along the rocky slope, using the crackling flames and shadows to mask their movement. Marcus's wounded shoulder throbbed with each step, the makeshift bandage Sarah had fashioned already soaked through with blood. Behind them, he could hear Kozlov shouting orders in Russian, directing his men to search the wreckage. The mine shaft entrance lay another quarter-mile up the mountain, hidden behind a stand of dead timber. Marcus remembered passing it during their initial reconnaissance, a narrow opening carved into the mountainside, sealed with rotting wooden boards that bore faded warnings about cave-ins and toxic gases. As they climbed higher, the temperature dropped noticeably. Their breath formed ghostly plumes in the thin air, and Marcus found himself struggling to maintain the pace. The blood loss was catching up with him, making his vision swim at the edges. "Marcus, look," Sarah pointed toward the tree line below. Flashlight beams were dancing through the darkness, moving in their direction. Kozlov had discovered their escape route. They broke into a desperate run, abandoning stealth for speed. Pine branches whipped at their faces as they crashed through the underbrush. Behind them, the pursuit was gaining ground. Marcus could hear the Russians calling to each other, coordinating their advance. The mine entrance appeared suddenly through the trees, exactly as Marcus remembered it. The wooden boards had been disturbed recently. Someone had pried them loose and then hastily repositioned them. Sarah's grandfather, most likely, during one of his final visits to check on his hidden fortune. "Help me with these," Marcus gasped, already working to pull away the rotting planks. Sarah joined him, her fingers bleeding as she tore at the splintered wood. The first shots rang out just as they cleared the entrance. Bullets sparked off the stone around the mine opening, sending chips of granite flying. Marcus shoved Sarah through the gap and dove after her, just as another volley chewed apart the timber where they'd been standing. Inside the mine, absolute darkness swallowed them whole. The air was stale and cold, carrying the metallic scent of old machinery and rock dust. Marcus fumbled for his phone's flashlight, the weak beam revealing rough-hewn walls that stretched away into the depths of the mountain. "The cache has to be deeper in," Sarah whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Grandfather would have wanted it protected from cave-ins near the entrance. They pressed forward into the tunnel, their footsteps crunching on loose gravel and debris. The mine shaft sloped downward at a gentle angle, supported by rotting timber frames that creaked ominously overhead. Marcus tried not to think about the millions of tons of rock above them, held back by century-old wooden supports. Behind them, the entrance erupted with gunfire as Kozlov's men reached the mine. Harsh Russian voices bounced off the tunnel walls, growing closer with each passing second. "There," Sarah breathed, pointing ahead. In the phone's wavering light, Marcus could make out a side passage, narrower than the main shaft. A pile of stones had been carefully arranged across the opening, but not mortared, meant to be moved when necessary. As they began clearing the rocks, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of boots on gravel echoing from the main tunnel. Kozlov and his men had entered the mine, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness like swords. The cache lay waiting behind the stone barrier, exactly as Sarah's grandfather had left it 30 years ago. Waterproof cases stacked floor to ceiling, their contents representing a fortune that had already cost too many lives. The explosion echoed through the mountain valley like thunder, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the crisp morning air. Marcus dove behind a fallen log as chunks of rock rained down around him, the remnants of what had been the cave entrance just moments before. The fortune, millions in gold bars and cash that had taken him weeks to excavate, was now sealed behind tons of collapsed stone. "You son of a bitch!" Valdez's voice carried across the clearing, raw with fury. The cartel leader emerged from the tree line with his remaining men, assault rifles trained on Marcus's position. "You buried it all!" Marcus checked his pistol. 3 rounds left. Against 8 armed men, it might as well have been empty. But the explosion had served its purpose. Better the fortune remain buried forever than fall into the hands of killers and drug runners. "It's over, Valdez," Marcus called out, keeping his head down as bullets splintered the bark above him. "No treasure, no leverage, just you and me settling old business." A harsh laugh echoed through the forest. "You think this ends here? My organization spans 3 countries. I'll hunt down everyone you've ever cared about." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah. His ex-wife was in protective custody, but he knew how far Valdez's reach extended. Even his former FBI colleagues weren't safe. The weight of his choices pressed down on him. Every decision that had led to this moment, every compromise that had cost him his badge and his honor. Movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Agent Rebecca Chen materialized from behind a cluster of pine trees, her tactical gear mud-stained and torn. She held up 2 fingers, then pointed toward the ridge. 2 more federal agents were moving into position. The cavalry had arrived, but would it be enough? Marcus's radio crackled to life. Chen's voice, barely a whisper. "When I give the signal, move toward the cabin. We've got overwatch on the high ground." The cabin where this had all started, where Marcus had first discovered the hidden chamber beneath the floorboards, following a decades-old map left by a long-dead bootlegger. What should have been his ticket to redemption had become a death sentence for too many people. Gunfire erupted from the ridge, Chen's team engaging Valdez's men. Marcus sprinted toward the cabin as chaos engulfed the clearing. Bullets whined past his head, and he felt one tug at his jacket sleeve. Behind him, someone screamed in pain. He reached the cabin's porch as the front door exploded inward. 2 of Valdez's men rushed inside, weapons ready. Marcus circled around back, remembering the loose board he'd discovered during his first reconnaissance. The same board that had revealed the treasure map hidden in the wall cavity. The rear window was broken, glass crunching under his boots as he climbed through. Voices echoed from the main room, Spanish curses mixed with English commands. Through the doorway he could see 1 gunman covering the front entrance, while another searched frantically through overturned furniture. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, pistol raised. 3 shots, make them count. A thunderous crash shook the cabin as something heavy struck the roof. One of the gunmen spun toward the sound, and Marcus took his chance. His first shot dropped the man by the door. The second gunman whirled around, finger tightening on his trigger, but Marcus's second bullet found its target first. Only 1 round left. Heavy footsteps on the porch announced Valdez's arrival. The cartel leader kicked aside his fallen men, eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Marcus. Both men raised their weapons simultaneously. "You cost me everything," Valdez snarled, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. 50 million in gold, 6 of my best men, and a distribution network I spent years building." "Good," Marcus replied, finger steady on the trigger. "Maybe that'll save a few lives." The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Through the broken window, Marcus could hear the distant sound of helicopters, more federal backup incoming. Valdez heard it too, his eyes flickering with the realization that his escape window was closing. "We can both walk away," Valdez said, though his weapon never wavered. "The treasure's buried. Your conscience is clear. I disappear. Find easier prey." Marcus thought of all the families destroyed by Valdez's drugs, all the agents who died investigating his operations. The promise of walking away was tempting, but some debts could only be paid in full. "No deals," Marcus said quietly. "Not anymore." Valdez's smile was cold as winter. "Then we die together." The cartel leader's finger began to squeeze the trigger just as the cabin's rear wall exploded inward. Federal agents poured through the breach, weapons trained and voices shouting commands. In the chaos, both men dove for cover, and Marcus realized with grim certainty that the final confrontation had only just begun. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mountainside as Marcus Chen stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the last FBI helicopter disappear into the valley below. 3 days had passed since the shootout that ended Vicente Morales and his cartel operation. The corrupt agents were either dead or in custody, and the mountain had finally fallen silent. Behind him, the cabin sat gutted and scarred, its foundation torn apart by excavation equipment. The fortune that had started this nightmare was gone. Every last bar of gold, every bundle of cash, loaded into armored trucks and hauled away as evidence. The FBI estimated its worth at over $40 million, money that would now disappear into the federal asset forfeiture system. Marcus lit a cigarette with shaking hands, his ribs still aching from the beating he'd taken. Sarah approached from the tree line, her arm in a sling but her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. She'd been clean for 72 hours now, the withdrawal finally breaking. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" she said, settling beside him on a fallen log. "All that money, all those bodies, and we're walking away with nothing." "Not nothing," Marcus replied, exhaling smoke into the crisp mountain air. "You're alive. That's worth more than any treasure." Agent Rebecca Torres emerged from the cabin's ruins, brushing dirt from her hands. As the lead investigator on the case, she'd been meticulous in documenting every detail of the operation. Her team had uncovered evidence linking the money to a decades-old armored car heist, solving a cold case that had haunted the Bureau for 20 years. "Clean sweep," Torres announced, joining them at the cliff's edge. Forensics found 7 more bodies buried around the property. "Looks like whoever stashed the money here was eliminating anyone who knew about it." Marcus nodded, remembering the skeleton he'd found in the mine shaft. The caretaker probably discovered it first. "Wrong place, wrong time. Like us," Sarah muttered. Torres said firmly, "You two did something right here. Your cooperation helped us take down one of the most violent cartels operating in this region. Morales had a network spanning 3 states. His death saves lives." Marcus flicked his cigarette into the abyss below. The FBI had offered him a consulting position, a chance to work cases from the outside. It wasn't reinstatement, but it was something. A path back from the wilderness his life had become. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we go home," Marcus said, "whatever that means anymore." Torres pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents. "The Bureau is prepared to offer you both protection if needed. Though with Morales dead and his organization scattered, the immediate threat should be minimal. There's also this." She handed the envelope to Marcus. Inside were official papers, forms marked with government seals and signatures. His eyes widened as he read. "What is it?" Sarah leaned over to look. "A reward," Marcus said quietly. "The family of one of the armored car guards who died in the original heist. They posted $1 million reward 20 years ago for information leading to recovery of the money." Torres smiled. "The Bureau reviewed your case. Without your discovery and cooperation, we never would have solved it. The family wants you to have it." Sarah stared at the papers. $1 million? "Split between you," Torres clarified. "And it's legitimate. Taxable, legal money." Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not for wealth or redemption, but for possibility. For the chance to build something new from the ashes of his old life. "There's one condition," Torres added. "You have to testify at the trials of the surviving cartel members and corrupt agents. It could take months." "We'll do it," Marcus said without hesitation. As the afternoon wore on, they packed the few salvageable items from the cabin. Marcus found the old photographs he'd discovered on his first day, images of families who'd once called this mountain home. He slipped them into his jacket pocket. Sarah stood in the doorway one last time, looking at the place where she'd nearly died, where she'd finally found the strength to fight her demons. "Think we'll ever come back here?" "Maybe," Marcus said, "when it's quiet again, when it's just a mountain." They walked down the dirt road together as the sun began to set, their footsteps echoing in the gathering dusk. Behind them, the mountain kept its secrets, scarred but enduring. Ahead lay the long journey back to civilization, to trials and testimony, to the slow work of rebuilding shattered lives. Marcus pulled out his phone and checked for signal. 3 bars, enough to call his daughter for the first time in 2 years. His finger hovered over her number, then he dialed. "Katie, it's Dad. I know it's been too long, but I wanted to tell you something. I'm coming home." The mountain watched them go, silent and eternal, keeping watch over its dead.